She missed the last bus on New Year's Eve until a single dad stepped in and changed everything. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Megan Morrison stood at the empty bus stop on Willow Street in the freezing Oregon rain at 11:47 on New Year's Eve, watching the taillights of the last bus disappear around the corner 3 blocks away. And she wanted to scream because she'd missed it by maybe 10 minutes, and now she was completely stranded in 28-degree weather, wearing nothing but scrubs and a thin jacket that did absolutely nothing against the wind. She just finished a brutal 16-hour shift at Willamette Valley Hospital, covering for a co-worker who called in sick. And she'd stayed an extra 45 minutes past the end of her shift, sitting with an elderly patient named Mr. Chen, who had no family and was actively dying, because nobody should have to die alone, especially not on New Year's Eve when the rest of the world was celebrating. Mr. Chen had passed away at 11:15, holding Megan's hand, while fireworks from early celebrations echoed in the distance. And she'd stayed with him until the funeral home came, and then she'd run for the bus. But her shift had gone so late that she'd missed the last one by just a few minutes. Her phone was at 3% battery because she'd forgotten to charge it during her double shift. And when she opened the Uber app, the surge pricing said $87 to get to her apartment, which might as well have been $1 million because she had exactly $32 in her checking account until payday on Friday. Here's the thing about moving to a small town 6 months ago to escape a bad breakup and start over completely alone. You don't have anybody to call when things go wrong. No friends to pick you up from a bus stop at midnight. No family within 500 miles who give a damn whether you freeze to death on the side of the road. Megan sat down on the frozen bench and started crying from exhaustion and cold, and the crushing loneliness of realizing she'd been in this town for half a year and still didn't have a single person she could call in an emergency. 5 miles away, Nathan Sullivan was driving home from his sister Jess's New Year's Eve party with his 7-year-old daughter Ellie half asleep in the back seat, and he was relieved to finally be leaving because he absolutely hated New Year's Eve with every fiber of his being. His wife Claire had died on January 2nd, 3 years ago, after an 8-month battle with ovarian cancer, and every New Year's Eve since then felt like the anniversary of the beginning of the end, the last holiday they'd celebrated before everything fell apart. He only went to his sister's party because Ellie needed to be around other kids and see her dad at least pretending to have a social life. But the second the clock hit 11:30, he'd grabbed his daughter and made his excuses and headed home. He was driving down Willow Street past the bus stop when he saw a woman sitting on the bench in scrubs with her face in her hands, clearly crying. And his first instinct was to keep driving because it wasn't his problem, and he had his own daughter to worry about. He made it about 2 blocks before Ellie's sleepy voice came from the back seat saying, "Daddy, why didn't we help that sad lady?" And Nathan said, "She's probably just waiting for someone, honey. I'm sure she's fine." Even though he knew damn well nobody was fine sitting alone at a bus stop crying on New Year's Eve. Ellie sat up straighter and said, "But she was really crying, like a lot, and Mommy always said we should help people who are sad, especially if they're alone. Remember, Mommy said that?" And the guilt hit Nathan like a punch to the gut. Because yeah, Claire had said that. Claire had been the kind of person who stopped for everyone who needed help, and he'd been trying to live up to her example for 3 years, and here he was, driving past someone in obvious distress. He made a U-turn in the middle of the empty street and drove back to the bus stop, and when he pulled up, the woman looked terrified, like she thought he was going to attack her. Nathan rolled down his window, keeping both hands visible on the steering wheel, and said, "Hey, I know this is really weird and you have zero reason to trust me, but my daughter saw you and we were wondering if you need a ride somewhere. It's freezing out here and it's New Year's Eve." The woman stood up and took a step back, and Nathan could see her doing the calculation of whether he was a good Samaritan or a serial killer. And he said, "I'm Nathan Sullivan. I own Sullivan Construction here in town. You can Google me if your phone works. I have my 7-year-old daughter in the back seat. I promise I'm not a creep. I'm just a dad who got guilted into stopping." Ellie popped her head up and waved through the window, saying, "Hi, I'm Ellie. You look really cold. We have heat in our car." And despite everything, the woman laughed a little bit. She walked closer and said, "I'm Megan. I'm a nurse at the hospital. I just got off a double shift and I missed the last bus and my phone's dead and I can't afford an Uber. Are you sure this isn't too much trouble? Nathan unlocked the doors and said, "It's no trouble at all. Where do you need to go?" And Megan said, "Riverside Apartments on 4th Street, if that's not too far out of your way." Megan climbed into the back seat next to Ellie instead of the front passenger seat, which Nathan respected because it showed she was being smart about safety. And Ellie immediately said, "Were you crying because someone died? You're wearing hospital clothes, so maybe someone died, and that's really sad." Nathan said, "Ellie, sweetheart, we don't ask people things like that." But Megan said, "Actually, yes, I was with a patient who passed away tonight. He didn't have any family, so I stayed with him so he wouldn't be alone when it happened." Ellie nodded very seriously and said, "My mom died 3 years ago. It's really sad when people die. I'm sorry your patient died. You're really nice for staying with him." They drove toward Riverside Apartments making small talk, and Nathan learned that Megan had moved to town 6 months ago, worked as an oncology nurse, which meant she specialized in cancer patients, and she'd pulled a double shift covering for someone, which is why she missed her bus. Megan asked about Ellie's mom very gently, and Nathan gave the short version: married young, ovarian cancer, gone in 8 months, just him and Ellie now trying to figure life out. When they pulled up to Riverside Apartments at 12:03 in the morning, the building was surrounded by fire trucks and emergency vehicles with red tape blocking the entrance and water literally pouring out of the second-floor windows. Megan's face went completely white, and she jumped out of the car and ran to the building manager, who was standing outside with a clipboard looking miserable. And Nathan and Ellie followed because this clearly wasn't good. The manager explained that a pipe had burst around 8 p.m. and flooded multiple units. The building was condemned until repairs could be made, which would take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks minimum. They'd posted notices on doors and tried calling all residents, but obviously Megan had been at work with a dead phone. Megan asked, "What am I supposed to do tonight? Where am I supposed to go?" And the manager shrugged and said, "Hotel maybe? Family?" Like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Nathan watched Megan's face crumple as she realized she had neither of those options, watched her sit down on the curb with her head in her hands while fireworks went off in the distance, celebrating the new year. And Ellie tugged on his jacket and whispered, "Daddy, she doesn't have anywhere to go. We have to help her. We have the guest room." Nathan knew it was crazy, knew you don't invite complete strangers to live in your house. But he also knew what Claire would have done in this situation, and he knelt down next to Megan and said, "Do you have somewhere you can stay tonight?" Megan didn't look up when she said, "I'll figure something out. Thank you for the ride. You've already done more than enough." And Nathan could hear the pride and exhaustion fighting in her voice. Ellie came and stood right in front of Megan and said, "You can stay at our house. We have a guest room, and it's really nice, and Daddy makes good pancakes in the morning." And Megan finally looked up with tears streaming down her face and said, "I can't just move into a stranger's house. That's insane." Nathan said, "It's New Year's Eve. Every hotel in town is booked. You clearly don't have family nearby. You can't sleep in your car in this weather. Just stay tonight, and tomorrow you can figure out something else. It's one night, and my daughter's right. We do have space." Megan looked between Nathan and Ellie for a long moment and finally said, "Just tonight, just one night. I'll be out of your hair first thing tomorrow." "Thank you so much. I don't know what else to say." They drove to Nathan's house in silence, and when they pulled up to the modest craftsman with Christmas lights still hanging from the gutters, Megan followed them inside like she was in a dream. The inside of the house made Megan's chest tight because it was clearly a shrine to Nathan's dead wife. Photos of a beautiful blonde woman everywhere. Decorations that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Everything frozen in time like a museum. Nathan showed her to the guest room, which was clearly his late wife's craft room with a sewing machine in the corner and half-finished quilts on shelves, and he said, "Bathrooms across the hall, towels in the closet, help yourself to anything you need, and Megan, seriously don't worry about leaving early. Get some rest, you've had a hell of a night." Megan sat on the bed after he left and looked around at all of Claire's things and thought, "I just moved into a dead woman's craft room on New Year's Eve. This is either the beginning of something or the biggest mistake of my life." Megan woke up on January 1st at 8 in the morning to the smell of pancakes and the sound of a 7-year-old jumping on her bed yelling, "You're still here, you didn't leave. Daddy's making breakfast, and he never makes breakfast. This is so exciting." And for the first time in 6 months, she woke up feeling like maybe she wasn't completely alone in the world. She followed Ellie downstairs to find Nathan in the kitchen, with flour on his shirt, flipping pancakes, while the radio played some country station, and it was so domestic and normal that Megan felt like she'd stepped into someone else's life. Over breakfast, Megan explained that her landlord had texted saying the apartment building inspection would take at least 3 to 4 weeks before anyone could move back in. And she was doing math in her head, trying to figure out how she could afford a hotel for a month on her nurse salary, when Nathan said something that made her brain completely stop working. He said, "Look, this is going to sound crazy, but the guest room is just sitting empty, collecting dust. Why don't you stay here until your building is fixed? And honestly, you'd be helping me out because I work really long construction hours, and if you could just be around when Ellie gets home from school, that would be huge." Megan said, "I can't just move into your house. We literally met 12 hours ago. That's insane." But Ellie was already bouncing in her seat saying, "Please stay, please, please, please. I really like you. And Daddy's never home after school and the babysitter's boring." Nathan said, "I'm not asking you to be a nanny. I'm just saying if we're both here anyway and you happen to be around, it would be mutually beneficial. You get a free place to stay, and I get some peace of mind knowing Ellie's not alone. Think about it as roommates, not charity." So Megan moved in temporarily with the 4 boxes that contained everything she owned, and Nathan helped her carry them up to the guest room. And when he saw how little she had, his face did this thing that made Megan want to cry because she could see him realizing just how alone she really was. They fell into a routine over the next few weeks that felt shockingly natural. Megan worked her night shifts at the hospital and came home in the mornings to sleep. Then she'd wake up around 3 and be there when Ellie got off the school bus, and they'd do homework together and start dinner. And Nathan would come home around 6 covered in sawdust, and the house would feel alive in a way it clearly hadn't in years. By late January, Megan had started actually cooking real meals instead of the frozen dinners Nathan had been surviving on. And she'd slowly started adding little touches to the house, like fresh flowers on the table and curtains that actually let light in. And Nathan caught himself smiling at dinner for the first time in 3 years. Ellie was thriving too. Her grades improved and she was laughing more. And she'd started talking about Megan like she was a permanent fixture, saying things like, "Megan and I are going to plant flowers in spring," like there was no question Megan would still be there. Everything shifted one night in late January when Ellie woke up at 2 in the morning with a fever of 103. And Nathan absolutely lost it in a way that Megan had never seen. He was shaking and couldn't form coherent sentences and kept saying, "We need to go to the hospital right now. Something's really wrong. We can't wait." Megan put her hands on his shoulders and said, "Nathan, look at me. She has the flu. It's going around her school. Her fever is high, but manageable. I'm a nurse. I've got this, but I need you to breathe." She stayed up all night monitoring Ellie's fever and giving her medicine and keeping her hydrated. And Nathan sat in the hallway outside Ellie's room with his head in his hands, clearly having some kind of PTSD episode. Around 4 in the morning, when Ellie's fever finally broke and she fell into peaceful sleep, Megan found Nathan still sitting in the hallway, and she sat down next to him and said, "Want to tell me what that was about?" And Nathan's voice was wrecked when he said, "Claire's cancer started with symptoms we thought were just the flu. By the time we realized it was serious, it was stage 4. And every time Ellie gets sick, I'm right back there watching my wife die and being completely powerless to stop it." Megan took his hand and said, "I'm an oncology nurse. That's my specialty. I work with cancer patients every single day." And Nathan looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time and said, "God, of course you do. That's some kind of cosmic joke, isn't it? The universe putting you in my house when hospitals are the last place I ever want to think about." They sat in silence for a long time, and then Nathan said, "Thank you for tonight, for knowing what to do, for not letting me spiral. I don't know what I would have done without you here." And Megan said, "You would have figured it out. You're a good dad, Nathan. You're doing better than you think." February hit and they were closer than ever, almost like a real family. And one night after Ellie went to bed, they were sitting on the couch watching some movie neither of them was paying attention to, and they were so close their shoulders were touching, and Nathan turned to say something, and Megan turned at the same time, and suddenly their faces were inches apart. They both leaned in and almost kissed, but at the last second, Nathan pulled back and said, "This is really complicated." And Megan said, "I know. I should probably find my own place. My apartment's been ready for 2 weeks. The landlord texted me." Nathan's face showed pure panic and he said, "You don't have to go. I don't want you to go." And Megan said, "But I can't stay like this. I'm not your wife, Nathan. I can't replace her, and I shouldn't have to. Look around. You haven't changed a single thing in this house in 3 years. I'm literally sleeping in her craft room surrounded by quilts she made. This isn't healthy for either of us." It was the first time either of them had acknowledged the elephant in the room, and Nathan didn't have a response because he knew she was right. Valentine's Day arrived, and Nathan's in-laws, Tom and Linda, showed up unannounced for their monthly visit with Ellie, and they walked into the house to find Megan cooking dinner and Ellie setting the table, and the whole scene looked domestic and couple-like in a way that made Linda's face go ice cold. Introductions were painfully awkward. Nathan explaining that Megan was staying with them temporarily after her apartment flooded. Tom asking, "Temporarily? It's been 6 weeks. That's not really temporary anymore, is it?" In this voice that made Megan want to disappear into the floor. Dinner was tense and terrible. Linda barely spoke to Megan and kept making comments about Claire like, "Claire always made pot roast on Sundays. It was Ellie's favorite. Remember, sweetheart?" And after Ellie went to bed, the confrontation Megan had been dreading finally happened. Linda said, "I need to know what's going on here, Nathan. Who is this woman really? Because it looks an awful lot like you're replacing our daughter." And Nathan said, "That's not fair. Megan needed help and we had space. It's not like that." Tom jumped in and said, "She's an oncology nurse, Nathan, really? You're working through your grief by playing house with someone who reminds you of the doctors who couldn't save Claire? This is textbook transference." And Megan was listening from the hallway where she'd gone to grab her phone, and she felt like she'd been slapped. She quietly went upstairs and started packing her things, and by morning her bags were by the door, and when Nathan found her, she said, "I'm going back to my apartment. It's time. Your in-laws are right. I'm a stand-in for everything you lost, and that's not fair to anyone." Nathan said, "That's not true. You're not a stand-in." But Megan said, "Aren't I? You haven't moved on Nathan. Your entire house is a museum to Claire. I can't compete with a ghost and I shouldn't have to." And that's when Ellie came running down the stairs and saw the bags and started crying, "No, Megan, don't go. Please don't leave us. I love you." And Megan knelt down and hugged her and said, "I love you too, sweetheart, but I have to go. I'll still see you, I promise." Even though they both knew that was probably a lie. March and April were absolutely miserable for everyone. Ellie's grades dropped, and she had tantrums and asked every single day when Megan was coming back. And Nathan threw himself into work doing 12-hour days because it was easier than being in the house that felt empty again. Megan picked up every extra shift the hospital offered and worked herself to exhaustion because sleeping meant dreaming about the family she'd lost. They didn't text or call, both too stubborn and hurt to reach out first. One day in late April, Nathan found a letter Ellie had written but never sent. It said, "Dear Megan, I miss you so much. Daddy is sad again, like he was before you came. I think he loves you, but he's too scared to say it. Can you please come back? Love, Ellie." And Nathan sat at the kitchen table staring at his daughter's handwriting for over an hour. On April 30th, he drove to the cemetery where Claire was buried and stood in front of her headstone and said out loud, "I think I'm falling in love with someone, and I feel so guilty. But Claire, I'm so tired of being sad. Ellie needs a mom and I need to live again. I think you'd like her. She saves people for a living." A voice behind him said, "She'd want you happy, Nathan." And he turned to see Linda standing there with flowers. And she said, "Tom and I have been talking a lot since Valentine's Day, and we were wrong. Claire wouldn't want you frozen in grief. She'd want Ellie happy and you happy. That girl Megan is good for both of you. Go get her before it's too late." Nathan showed up at Willamette Valley Hospital on May 1st at 11 o'clock at night, knowing Megan's shift ended at midnight, and he sat in his truck in the parking lot, rehearsing what he was going to say for the 100th time, because if he screwed this up, he was going to lose the best thing that had happened to him and Ellie in 3 years. At 5 minutes past midnight, Megan walked out of the hospital entrance looking absolutely exhausted with her hair pulled back and her scrubs wrinkled. And when she saw Nathan leaning against his truck, her face went through about 17 different emotions before landing on confused. She walked over slowly and said, "Nathan, what are you doing here? Is Ellie okay? Did something happen?" And Nathan said, "Ellie's fine. She's at my sister's house. I came here because I needed to see you. I needed to tell you something that I should have said 2 months ago." He took both her hands and she let him, even though she looked terrified. And he said, "You're not a replacement, Megan. You're not a stand-in for Claire or for the doctors who couldn't save her. You're not filling a Claire-shaped hole in our lives. You're Megan, and I'm in love with Megan. The real, actual you, not some ghost or memory or substitution." Megan's eyes filled with tears, and Nathan kept going, because if he stopped, he'd lose his nerve. "I've been living in the past for 3 years, keeping everything exactly the same, because changing anything meant admitting she's really gone. But you showed me I can honor Claire's memory and still build a new life. Those two things can exist together." Megan was full on crying now, and she said, "I'm so scared, Nathan. I'm terrified of not being enough, of you always comparing me to her, of Ellie losing someone else if this doesn't work out. I can't break that little girl's heart." Nathan wiped the tears off her face and said, "I can't promise everything will be perfect, but I can promise I see you, the real you, not anyone else. And Megan, Ellie's already lost you once. She's been grieving you for 2 months. She wrote you a letter saying I love you, but I'm too scared to say it. And she was absolutely right." Megan laughed through her tears and said, "I love her so much. I love both of you so much it terrifies me." And Nathan said, "Then come home for real this time, not as a temporary roommate. Come home and let's be a family." They kissed right there in the hospital parking lot under the streetlights, and it was perfect until a small voice from Nathan's truck said, "Finally, oh my God, you guys took forever." And both adults jumped about 3 feet in the air. Ellie popped up from the back seat where she'd apparently been hiding the entire time, and Nathan said, "Ellie Marie Sullivan, you were supposed to stay at Aunt Jess's house. How did you even get in my truck?" And Ellie grinned and said, "I snuck out. You needed backup. Hi, Megan, I missed you so much." All three of them ended up in a group hug in the parking lot, crying and laughing, and Megan said, "You brought a 7-year-old on your grand romantic gesture?" And Nathan said, "Technically, she brought herself, but yeah, apparently I did." They drove home together, all three of them. And when they walked into the house, Megan noticed immediately that things had changed. Claire's photos were still there, but they'd been rearranged. New pictures mixed in. The craft room had been partially cleared out. Small changes that showed Nathan had started the work of moving forward. Over the next 7 months, they made the house truly theirs. Megan and Nathan redecorated together, keeping the things that mattered but adding new memories. Claire's photos stayed up in respectful places because she would always be part of their story, but the house stopped feeling like a museum and started feeling like a home. Nathan started going to grief counseling, which he should have done years ago. And in July, when Tom and Linda came to visit, they brought Claire's recipe book, and Linda handed it to Megan, saying, "She'd want you to have this. Your family now. Welcome." December 31st rolled around exactly 1 year after the night they met, and Nathan told Megan he wanted to take her somewhere special, but wouldn't say where. And when they pulled up to the bus stop on Willow Street at 11:47 at night, Megan looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Nathan got out of the truck and helped her out and walked her to the exact bench where she'd been sitting a year ago. And he said, "1 year ago right now, you were sitting right here crying and alone and freezing, and I almost drove right past you, almost left you here." Megan said, "But Ellie made you come back." And Nathan said, "She did, and you changed our entire lives. You brought light back into a house that had been dark for 3 years. You showed me that moving forward isn't betraying the past." He got down on one knee right there at the bus stop and pulled out a ring, and Megan's hands flew to her mouth and she started crying before he even said anything. Nathan said, "Megan Morrison, will you marry me? Will you officially be Ellie's mom and my wife? Will you make this family permanent?" Megan was sobbing too hard to speak, so she just nodded over and over. And Nathan slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her. And that's when Ellie came running from where she'd been hiding in the truck again, holding a sign that said, "We're a family now," in glitter letters. They stood there at the bus stop at midnight while fireworks went off all around them, celebrating the new year. And Megan thought about how a year ago she'd been alone and broken, and now she had everything she'd ever wanted. They got married in June in Nathan's backyard with about 50 people. Simple and beautiful, and Ellie was the flower girl wearing a dress she'd picked out herself and taking her job incredibly seriously. Tom walked Megan down the aisle because her own father hadn't come. They'd been estranged for years and he didn't approve of her life choices. But Tom squeezed her hand and whispered, "You're our daughter now too." And Megan cried before the ceremony even started. Nathan's vows wrecked everyone when he said, "You taught me that hearts can break and heal and love again. Claire will always be part of my story, but you're my future. You're my home. You're the person I choose every single day." Megan's vows were, "I was lost and alone on the coldest night of the year, and you stopped when nobody else would. You gave me a family when I had none. You showed me what home really means. It's not a place, it's the people who refuse to leave you stranded." 2 years later, on New Year's Eve, they were at home with their family of four. Ellie was 10 now, and holding her baby brother, who was 6 months old. And they were watching the ball drop on TV because neither of them wanted to go out when they had everything they needed right there. Megan was holding the baby and looking at the photos on the wall. Claire's picture was still there in a place of honor, and next to it were their wedding photos and baby pictures and family portraits. Past and present coexisting peacefully, like Nathan had promised they could. At midnight they kissed while Ellie made gagging noises and the baby laughed. And Nathan said, "Remember when you missed that bus?" And Megan said, "Best missed bus in the entire history of transportation." And Ellie said, "I'm basically the reason you guys are married. I told Daddy to help you. So really this whole family exists because of me." Both adults laughed and said, "You're absolutely right, kiddo." Because it was true, none of this would have happened without a 7-year-old's insistence that they help a sad stranger. Sometimes the worst night of your life turns out to be the beginning of everything good. Megan missed the last bus on New Year's Eve and thought she'd lost everything. Her apartment was flooded and she was stranded and completely alone in a town where she knew nobody. Nathan almost drove past her, almost left her sitting there in the freezing cold. But his daughter said, "Daddy, help her," and 3 lives changed forever in the best possible way. Moving on from grief doesn't mean forgetting the people we've lost. It means honoring them by choosing to keep living and keep loving and keep opening our hearts even when it's scary. Nathan learned he could cherish Claire's memory and build a future with Megan. Those two things weren't mutually exclusive. They could coexist and make his life richer, not divided. Megan learned that home isn't a place you plan for or work toward. Sometimes it's just the family who stops when you're stranded and refuses to leave you in the cold. If you've ever felt stuck in loneliness or grief, if you've ever thought you'd be alone forever, if you've ever been the person crying at a bus stop thinking nobody cares, your moment is coming. Your person who stops is out there looking for you even if they don't know it yet. Hit that subscribe button if this reminded you that second chances are real and family finds you exactly when you need it most. Share this with someone who's still waiting for their New Year's miracle. And remember that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when everything seems to be falling apart. Thanks so much for being here with us today.